All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the List Report, your one-stop shop for everything ACL. I am your host, Ben Sugarman. With me today, we got our usual crew of the lovely Miss Miranda, the Trash Knight himself, Evan Ringo, and we're joined by a
What up?
very
What up?
special guest, Lance Hoffman. So, for this podcast, it's been requested and it's been a hot button issue for all fighters, all people involved in ACL. We're talking rules today. So our special guest, Lance, he's our de facto rules expert. So Lance, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of background as what exactly you are in the ACL and kind of what roles you play in the sport.
Yeah, sure thing. First of all, I've been fighting. This is my sixth season as a member of the team. I am presently representing the ACL as the head referee and the authenticity czar, whatever you want to call it. I'm the guy who tells you your kit doesn't look good enough. I also am the American representative to the IMCF for the referees.
Okay, awesome. So when we get started here, so we're just going to be, we got a few questions that we put out to the ACL members. Our main goal for today is we want to kind of bring up, everyone can go on to the ACL website and download the combat rule sets. I think we're on version 3 right now. You can
Would
go
that
ahead and
be
download the,
aclknights.com, acl-combat-rules.html?
exactly that. It's almost like you get paid for this.
Go. I wish, man.
But so I highly recommend download the rule set, check it out for yourself. This is going to be more of kind of a specific probing into some of the kind of misinterpreted rules and kind of what the process is for becoming a head ref at your local chapter events, your regional events, stuff like that. So before we get
Yeah, sure.
too into it, Lance, can you run us down what the qualifications are to be a ref in the ACL?
It depends entirely on what level of ref you're talking about. Every event at every level, whether it's national, conference, regional, local, chapter, whatever it is, there's referees always present. All that is required to be a referee is you need to be familiar with the rules and you need to be willing to follow orders and do your best to keep the fighters safe. You don't require experience, and for the majority of our history, I mean, this is still a very young sport. It's only been going on in the U.S. for something like 6 years now at this point. And we're only now starting to get to the point where some of the referees have fighting experience on a significant level, which is great for everything. But for the most part, you don't need that experience. If you just want to come out and help, you can come out. You can be one of the line refs who stand outside the rail. And again, just yell stop fight when that happens. If you see something unsafe, you yell that. But for the most part, on the very basic level, all you need is to be willing to help out. And that's honestly what most people get into refereeing wanting to do. Above that, you got the head refs at these sort of events who have to be experienced referees because they're the ones calling the shots. You've got regional refs above that. You've got conference refs above that. And you got national ref at the top of that. Then you have international refs. That's a whole other ball of wax.
Okay, awesome. So now you mentioned the refs have to be experienced to become head ref. Is there a running list of who exactly is qualified to be a head ref, or is it
At,
kind of up to
as of this
necessity?
point, as of this point, at like especially at a local level, we don't have a list of who is authorized to be a head referee. Now, in the future, we are going to be working towards, like in the next season or so, we're going to be having a basic standardized, interview for referees, just to make certain that they understand the way the framework is supposed to work. I'm going to let you know this as well, which is going to get a bunch of people panicking needlessly. So let me stoke those fires a little bit ahead of time. We are not going to be disallowing anything, but there is going to be a brief interview to qualified fighters in the future as well. Just to make sure that
Oh
they
shit.
understand, make sure they understand what the structure is, the very bare basics of how, if the ref tells you stop fight, stop fight. We're not trying to throw anybody off the field. This is not going to be a fighting test. It is not an SCA style thing like that. It's basically just going to make sure we don't get an idiot on the field who thinks it's okay to like headbutt a ref or throw a punch at a spectator, that kind of thing.
All right, I'm already objecting. It should be perfectly legal to headbutt your ref if they make a bad call. So
That's fine, Ben, but if you headbutt me, I get to headbutt you back.
fair point. So,
All right, any more panic on the fighter thing, by the way, before we move on? Because I know that's going to come anyway.
Ringo, anything on that? All
You
right, I'll
still
take
with
that
us,
as a
Ringo?
no. All right, so and you mentioned you're also part of the authenticity board.
Yes.
Real quick, this is also meant to kind of highlight some stuff that for new people in the sport, what they should be looking out for, especially if they come from a region that doesn't really have a whole lot of senior people. What are some of the big
Mhm.
key things that you are starting to notice? Uh, People kind of get bounced for when it comes to weapon checks, armor checks, and things to really kind of keep in mind when you're starting to assemble your kit.
Some of the most common issues that we run into, you mentioned weapons. We'll start with that because that's the easiest one.
Hmm.
The most common issue we run into with weapons are twofold. Either one, there's excessive surface rust, or the weapon's otherwise in bad condition.
Ringo
Uh,
giggles.
I know nothing about this. I know nothing about this.
So that is honestly the most common issue we run into. Yes, you should match your weapon to the period and the region of armor that you're using, and we can get into the terminology of that more if you want. But you should match it to that region. But the most common reason things get bounced is they're in bad repair. So for weapons, that's step number one right there.
Okay.
If you do not have a one of those little Marshall's gauges we use to inspect weapons at the event, every chapter should have those. If you don't have them, get in touch with me, get in touch with somebody. We'll get you set up with something. They're not expensive, but it's something everybody should have. It'll save everybody.
I know Cap Brooks and Mikey Johnston both have the design for ones, and I think they both have a shit ton of extra for sale. So if you get in touch with either of them, you can get yourself one. They're really
I got
cheap.
mine through Cat, so they're it's good stuff. They all match up the same. Just making sure that there's no points that are too sharp. There's nothing, if you can take care of that ahead of time, that takes a whole lot of problems off the table right away. One of the other issues we run into regarding authenticity, and it's generally pretty common, is that people are approaching it thinking, well, this will be good enough and it'll be fine. Nobody will complain. This has passed inspection before, therefore it'll always pass forever. And especially as the gear gets beat up, or as the black paint chips off of those eye bars in those Britash bassinets that everybody is very fond of. Great visibility and great airflow. I get that. But as it starts to look like trash, it starts to become a problem. Otherwise, the authenticity is not as huge a stumbling block as a lot of people are afraid it will be. I get questions pretty regularly on Messenger. People say, "Hey, will this helmet work with this?" And I'm happy to just take a look and give it the eyeball test and see if I've got any size citations set aside for it. So feel free to send those in if you have questions specifically. But otherwise, nah, those are the most common ones I run into.
And we brought this up in a previous discussion as well, but there was some, the Iron Horde has their numbers on the back of the tabards. We started talking later about possible sponsors and stuff. As part of the authenticity board, if one of the chapters ended up, some local pizza shop wanted their name on the back and they get like $50 on a pizza for every chapter match, would that be part of the authenticity board to then say, that tabard's not allowed at certain events, or is there any sort of guidelines as far as, if someone gets sponsored?
Well, first of all, sponsorship would have to go through ACL corporate. That's not something people take care of on the local level.
Okay.
So the circumstances for that would have to be hammered out. That's above my pay grade. That's Jay and Andre's problem to hammer out the details of that. I personally am not a big fan of the stencil style numbers on the back of the Iron Horde surcoats. I love those guys. They're great guys. Glad to see them coming out. I'm personally not a fan of it, but we're not going to disallow it, especially not domestically.
Yeah, two questions on that.
Go ahead.
Hey, is there a better, so like I love the numbers thing, but like since you're more of a authenticity guy. Is there a better option? Like, is there something we can do that still looks authentic? That's question
Well,
one.
there's a few
So that we can
ways to
tell
go
people
about
apart.
Number one, the most authentic thing possible is you put some personalized heraldry on that. That was the original purpose of the stuff.
Right.
From the middle of the 15th century forward, Roman numerals were still used for display. And again, my fundamental, teeth grating, it puts my teeth on edge thing with the stencil style numbers is the fact that it's a visible stencil, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's so clearly modern.
It
So,
is screamingly
even,
modern. It is
exceptionally
eye-gougingly modern.
And it's also
not.
this could go down on the leg portion, on back, somewhere that's still conspicuous and able to be seen, but not necessarily so blatantly in your face.
Yeah. My other question though, we haven't traditionally been banning people for authenticity stuff besides like non-period shoes domestically. If someone starts showing up like wearing something from the 13th century with like a 15th century helm, are you going to start bouncing them? Or is that still...
The way that is generally handled is a couple of ways. Number one, the first thing we look at is how long has this person been fighting? Is this an emergency short-term replacement piece to cover something else? For example, one of my guys at New World Cup, Cousteau, he's brand new to the sport. He's wearing a, middle 14th century Central Asian body armor. People call it Mongol. It's not Mongol. It's not even close to Mongol. If anything, it would be like Tartar or Kipchak, but I'm going off point. He had a Central Asian body armor, and he had a middle 15th century kettle helm on, specifically because it was his first, national event. We were trying to get him a helmet to work for it. It wasn't ready yet. He had to borrow something. In the short term, that's the sort of thing we would look at and go, okay, he's trying to replace it. This isn't a long-term thing that we're going to be seeing. Just, don't make a habit of this. If somebody, for example, has been around for a while and they've been wearing the same thing repeatedly, we'll have words with them because internationally that could get bounced. And that's really what all of the authenticity stuff comes down to. We let a lot of stuff slide domestically, specifically because we're not trying to throw people off the field, but we want you to get ready for international standards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But we would generally, before we would bounce somebody off the field for something, at the event previous, somebody would have told them, listen, you've got to cover this gap better.
Right.
Now, again, there are certain allowances. There's things like for your hands, we allow a wide swath of gauntlets just to keep that protection. Because frankly, until mid 15th century, there weren't gauntlets that were strong enough for what we're doing. Right. There just weren't. And so we make a lot of allowances. Now, that's considered a safety allowance. You can wear later period gauntlets, or you can wear like the famous Gretters, which are vaguely made to look like finger gauntlets, but didn't actually exist in period at any point. We allow that. That's fantastic because you need your hands. Right. We don't want people getting broken. But to very gradually get back to the point, we would give you a warning. We say, okay, you can wear this for today. That's fine. Wear it for this tournament. But if I see you wearing the same thing at nationals in the spring, that's on you.
Yeah. And for all the new people listening as well, I can't emphasize this enough. Please talk to your chapter heads, your region heads. Float your ideas by them before you make any major purchases, because a lot of this stuff they're going to know as well and be able to put you on the right path.
Yeah, never buy a helmet that you haven't tried on something similar to it before. Try on every helmet you see. Every helmet has a different style of vision, different level of airflow. Try on everything before you buy anything.
Right. So, we touched on everything before you got on the field, but I think it's time we go into what people kind of came here to hear about. Start talking about some rules, some of the newer things. The first thing I kind of want to touch on a few weeks ago we saw the first, I think, national level event where Sword and Buckler was an actual sign up event that you can fight in. So one of the questions I'll lead off with is, are buckler punches allowed?
Are buckler punches allowed? Are we
Right.
talking melee or duels?
For the singles. Yeah.
For singles, they are allowed, but they are not scoring blows.
Okay. And just so everyone knows too, and I've seen both minute rounds and first to 5. What's the preferred for?
For buckler, it is always either 3 or 5 blows. Bucklers are and two-handed axes. When we get to that, the short axe style of dueling will also be counted blows, not timed rounds.
Okay, so there is a plan to also implement axes in this as well.
That is something that was requested, and the rules have been finalized. It's just waiting to be put up and announced.
Okay.
So yeah, a bit of a sneak preview for you there. That's going to be in the next rule modification.
Just to be clear, that's not an axe and buckler duel. You're talking about just short two-handed axe duels.
No. That is a
like
short
longsword
axe
duel,
Okay.
but with
technically,
axes.
technically, it would be called a long axe, but it is smaller than a polearm. It is a two-handed weapon. It is a two-handed combat style. Counted blows, not timed rounds.
Okay. Well, it'll be something to look forward to and start training up at the chapters.
And just to touch on back on the buckler thing, in the last handful of tournaments that I've run that did host singles was a mixed format. There have been requests for sword and buckler. We had left it off a couple of registrations. However, the fighters want it, the fighters can have it. And it has been consistently doing 5 blows above the hip, no timed rounds. And the 3 blows is so fast that for spectators especially, they have no idea what just happened.
Which might be less of an issue with the long axe duels, especially because those weapons hit so hard and they're slower weapons, they're more powerful weapons. We might want to limit the amount of damage people are taking.
Right. First to 3 might not be a bad idea on axes.
Yeah, first to 3 might not be a bad idea. But again, both of those forms, again, there are no plans whatsoever for that to be contested internationally. That is purely a thing for use within the ACL, not the IMCF. So again, that is not a point of emphasis for us. I know they're popular. People want to do them. That's great. If there's time, if the event has time, and if it's not a melee event, great. It's there. People can have it. By all means, whatever you want to fight with to have fun.
Right.
But again, that's not going to be a major priority at especially the national level events.
Right. So circling back to the sword and buckler, what sort of is the rationale behind the buckler not counting for points?
The basic rationale for that is the same reason why shield to head contact is disallowed in sword and shield duels, which is initially what the organizers of the sport wanted to see, and this predates the American team even existing. The thing that they were looking for in the single combat was a display of skill with the weapon. They wanted something that looked more elegant, that looked more skillful, in place of what was seen as a very rough brawl in the melees, if that makes sense.
Right.
So several of the things that made it look like a rougher form and less elegant were, for example, somebody going into a sword and shield duel, and instead of throwing a single sword shot, just shield punching somebody into oblivion. It's like, well, that's not a display of skill. Well, yeah, it is. It's just a different kind of skill, and it's not the kind of skill that they were emphasizing. So, and that's something that singles really have been maintained for, is to show skill at arms, specifically in the handling of the sword. Right.
Okay, I guess the only reason I'm going down this thought path is traditionally, buckler, if you're going to be blocking things, I would think a buckler's not that great. So from what I've kind of understood, a buckler primarily was for punching.
That's debatable, very much so, especially... Well, for example, the term swashbuckling comes from wearing the buckler on the hilt of the sword and clattering around and making a big spectacle of yourself. Ringo, you taking notes, by the way? No? Okay, cool. But in like 16th century forward, where like civilian carry, where they'd be carrying like the long rapier, the longer, lighter sword, the buckler was very much a defensive weapon. That's not the kind of combat we're simulating here. But again, when you get to why a buckler blow to the head it doesn't score a point in a sword and buckler duel, it's because they're emphasizing the sword play.
Okay.
And again, the single combat we do here is aimed to prepare you for international competition.
Okay.
So as long as we're fighting sword and shield over here, for example, to use that as the easy comparison, we're going to enforce it as closely as we can to the sort of rule set you're going to be facing if you are the national champion at the World Championship tournament. Because that's what we want you to be prepared for. We don't want to prepare you for one rule set and then throw you into the deep pool with the sharks on, internationally in Europe when you've been prepared for something else.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and towards that, one of the steps we're going to be trying to take that would change the way national championships have been contested in singles combat. If you've watched the videos internationally, this is the case. The lists for single combat in Europe are significantly smaller, and that's something that unfortunately has hurt a few of our duelists when they prepare over here in this great big wide open field, and then they go to Europe and they're stuck in this little phone booth. So one of the things we're going to be doing, especially at the national tournament and at national champion contestants or contests in the future, is we're looking at creating a smaller Eric for you guys to be fighting in, a smaller set of rails to give you a better preparation for what to expect internationally.
Okay, awesome. Look forward to seeing it. Along the same duels format, we've been seeing a lot. The Knights Hall has been very big on this style of fighting. I've seen a lot done on the East Coast, and I'm sure on the West Coast as well. It'd be the night fights.
Yeah.
So, from what I've heard, there are official rule sets being laid out and possibly implemented for possible chapter matches, or give us an update on that.
The format of chapter matches is actually separate from the ACL rules. So that's actually not something that I'm working in right now. Any restructuring of night fights, which are basically exhibition matches, like I said, the Knights Hall hosts a bunch of those. We have seen a few out on the West Coast. I know it's a very popular format because it's the best preparation for melees between single fighters. That is not something that I am looking to be, that I am in charge of. That is not something that I'm going to be modifying. So if any changes are coming through there, it's not going to be through the formal ACL rules. Again, that's a separate set of X's and O's.
Okay, so I guess I'm now just kind of a little confused about how that's run then. Because I think like everything.
Oh, real simple. Do you ever see night fights at a national level tournament?
Unfortunately not.
No, you don't. It's not one of the things we're preparing for. Because again, you're not going to see night fights at the World Championships in Europe. And nationally, what the ACL and what I am in charge of doing is trying to prepare our fighters as best as possible for what they're going to see at the World Championships.
Okay. And just to tie it in, Miranda, if strictly from a viewing perspective, which do you think? Because which would you prefer to see, the duels or the night fights? Which is kind of more of a spectacle to watch?
Well, I personally have never seen a night fight because all the tourneys that I run, those are not on it's not on the schedule.
Okay.
I've not been to the Knights Hall. I've not made it to the East Coast to participate or view any of those. However, from what I've heard from other people, it's a really exciting thing to watch. So I think from a spectator standpoint, would it help put butts in the seats? Potentially, yes, absolutely. The duels are very technical. For people that have never been to a tournament or an ACL event, they're not really sure or clear what it is that, they understand the big loud clashes and the steel striking steel and the sparks flying. Typically is why I start my tournaments with sword and shield, because while it is very technical, and the guys that are fighting it are really good at what they do, the crowd does not, they're not into it. Right. So bigger the boom, the bigger the crowd, the bigger, it tends to go that direction. I would love, if we have time or if registration warrants it, to include night fights, even if it's just for demonstration purposes, even if it's just for getting the crowd wowed and geared up for melees, if we're, or if we need to buy some time and we need spacing, if we do a singles match and then, one of those guys that was competing as a duelist is also a melee fighter, be able to give them a break in between and not just go straight from a duel to a melee, back to a duel, back to a melee. It could be logistically and scheduling in our favor.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, awesome. And I definitely agree with that. I've been part of duels. I've been part of night fights. I would easily say night fight is the preferred method, or the preferred fighting for me, at least, if I have to go one-on-one. But I understand the aspect of getting people ready for the national tournament, or the international tournament, excuse me. So, it's something to keep in mind. And I guess you said it's not actually a chapter match sanctioned event, so if chapters wanted to do a night fight round instead of a duels round, it's technically not allowed for chapter matches?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, so something to keep in mind.
Night fights are a separate animal altogether. Think of those. Those are like your boxing prize fights. That is a completely separate method of fighting within the armored combat that we do.
Okay, we'll have to keep that in mind.
I would still love to see them incorporated, even though they don't count towards the international. They don't count towards the winning of a match. They don't, if they're strictly exhibition, I would still love to see more of them. And I think our viewers and spectators would as well.
Right. I'm sure it would be very popular. Like you said, it's a great spectacle. It's also an extremely taxing form of fighting.
Yeah, and from what I've seen, it's a lot easier to kind of digest for the spectators. Some of the melee rules kind of seem a little, they can't grasp it. They love to see the violence, all that. But the one-on-one format it's really kind of simple for them to digest and be like, all right, this is violent in his face. That guy's clearly beating on that guy. I know who's winning this. And I do have to apologize. I think Ringo did time out here, so I'm going to try and talk offline with him, try and get him back in. But looks like at least for the short term, he's going to be out.
He's been having some connectivity issues.
Right, yeah. So moving right along, we're going to start talking about a little bit melee rules as well. I've got a lot of interest in that from the community about trying to get some things clarified.
Awesome, fire away.
So one thing, I know the rule for backstraps for helmets. If you want to, can you just run down the current rules and what refs should be thinking about when a helmet does inevitably pop off?
Well, it doesn't have to be inevitable. It tends to happen quite a bit. But the rules for helmets and their securing systems, you have to have a chin strap. Obviously, that's always been the case. There also needs to be some form of secondary retention strap or some sort of secondary point of securing on the back of the helmet to your body armor. It needs to be secured to your torso in the back. It doesn't have to be a Simon strap, as the most common term for it is. But if it does rip off or your helmet does come off and the strap didn't fail and your method of securing it failed, then you're done for the day. That is the rule for that. If the strap breaks, if it's smashed apart or something like that, and it's a normal wear and tear of fighting in it, you're not red carded, but you need to obviously repair that and have it re-inspected before you come back out.
Okay. So just to clarify, if it breaks in the fighting as a blow, get it fixed and you're back in. If it's just poor design and it just kind of some breaks off, then
if you tie it on with a shoelace, don't expect a lot of sympathy. But yeah, we all the gear fails. You've all been around the sport long enough to know that there's nothing that's going to last forever. We understand that sometimes just stuff happens with big people around here swinging around steel weapons with a whole lot of force. It can happen. Just make a good effort to keep yourself safe, and the reps will try to keep you safe too.
And something that I've noticed as well, just from strapping guys back into their tops and popping tops when they come off the field, is a lot of the leather that is being used is old and sweaty and thin and stretched. And that's something that should really be maintained and kept up with. Like, if you've got new leather on there, it's most likely not going to get cut in half.
Right.
Most likely, yes. And leather does eventually wear out. It lasts a long time, but again, whatever form of combat people came to the ACL from, I guarantee you it wasn't as hard on gear as our form of fighting is.
Right.
My background, I came from the SCA, and leather would basically last forever there. It's just never going to rip. It's not going to be an issue. It's not the case here. We have to replace spent straps, and I've had to replace a chin cup, which is just one piece of leather with a little hole cut out there and the anchor points on the sides. I'd never would have had to replace that in another form of fighting, but the strain and the amount of tension and the amount of sweat that soaks into it, the leather dies. That's all there is to it.
And so along that same line of thinking, so if the backstrap ends up working, nothing's broken on it, but something with the chin strap ends up, inevitably failing, or just somehow the backstrap stays on, but the helmet still flies off. Yellow card or red card?
Number one, it would never be a yellow card. At most, if it comes off and you're still on your feet, obviously you take a knee right away, you cover up.
Right.
And the refs at that point should yell stop fight. And everyone else echoes stop fight.
Hey, is my mic working now then?
Your
Yes,
mic is
your mic's
working
working.
because I can hear you typing.
How did I know it was Ringo?
I was trying to see if it was in the chat. Sorry. I'm back.
All right, welcome back.
Yeah, so if the backstrap stays on and the helmet does come off, which has happened, immediately the fighter goes down, they cover up, the refs yell stop fight, we get them off the field and then resume it. If it's a chin strap that tears or something like that, fix it, be re-inspected, and you can come back on because it did its job. If, for example, the chin strap remains intact, it slides up over your face and the helmet comes off, well, that's a problem in the structure of the strapping. That's the sort of thing where the helmet did its job. The way you set it up, it was not able to keep you safe. Therefore, You're done for the day.
So you can say the same rules for backstrap apply to the chin strap, and structurally holds together, comes off, you're out for the day.
If your helmet comes off without a clear point of failure, you're done for the day.
Okay. All right. And so Ringo, since you are back, I do want to quickly get your perspective on it too. We talked about the night fights and their potential for kind of really putting more asses in seats when it comes to events, as opposed to our more European style duels. Just from the Knights Hall and the numbers you get, would you say what are the numbers for a night fight night as opposed to your chapter match nights?
I don't. It's hard to say because we have to take up more real estate for the fighting when we do chapter matches. So we can only sit 40 people when we do a chapter match versus we can sit like 80 to 100, I think, when we do a night fight.
Mm-hmm.
So numbers. So there's more space, so we could have more people at the night fight, but that might not mean it's actually more popular. That being said, when we do a duels day, we'll have like 10, 20 people. If we have a night fight, we usually have 40 people, 60 people. The night fights definitely seem to be more popular with the crowds. And there certain other leagues in Europe do them, and they're very popular over there. IMCF just hasn't created their version yet. I would be surprised if we don't see that in the next 5 years if IMCF doesn't make their own exhibition style. I just don't know what it will be, and obviously, since Lance hasn't said they're doing that, obviously not moving on it right now.
It is not being moved on now. I haven't heard anything about that.
Yeah, but there's no way we're not. Personal opinion, throwing it out. No way we're not seeing it in the next 5 years.
Okay.
And
The
also
only way
clarify.
the only way I think we wouldn't is because the style of fighting is so similar to melee, just with the one-on-one.
Yeah, I mean, you got to change. You got to add some rules, some gamification to it to make it not just first to takedown or whatever. Which, there's some stuff that you have to do with it, but you can sort of walk a fine line between the technicality of the high level sword and shield duelist and then the brutality of a 16th on 16. And if you can get that perfect, that's the perfect one-on-one match. So I think it's just structuring the rule system right, and I'll bet we're gonna start seeing some attempts made like that. I mean, that's the whole point of what we were trying to do. Actually, we created night fights as a training method for melees because it's easier to put together singles events.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, but then from that we were like, oh, let's see if we can start upping the weapon skill, if we can start making it flashier as a show, and but still keep that brutality.
Right. So, and since you just reconnected, we talked about singles rules. Is there any kind of rules or anything on your mind, Ringo, that you want to kind of bring up since you just connected? We talked about sword and buckler. We talked a little bit about the armor check-in. Anything you want to kind of bring up now that you're connected?
And we just lost him again.
All right. Well, that section is cursed for him. We're not going to bring that up again.
Miranda, do you have a question in there somewhere?
No, I think my comment was just, I wanted to make sure that I clarified my standpoint on night fights versus duels is not necessarily one over the other, is incorporating both, because we have to have the duelists and the melees. This is what you're training and preparing for international combat. However, for spectators' sake and excitement and keeping people in the stands engaged, I'm all for adding night fights, not an either or.
I'm very curious to see how this format we've been using for the past year at the ACL national level events is going to pan out moving forward. We had New World Cup, which was melee only, which I thought was great. We have the singles national championship coming up in January, where it's just going to be all the duels, and then we have nationals in Utah coming up in April, where it's going to be both. I would honestly be mixed format. I'd be very happy to see melee exclusive and duel exclusive events moving forward, assuming that it works out well over the next few months.
Yeah, definitely agree. So moving on to kind of some of the melee rules that we touch on the helmet, with the strap coming loose. Another thing I want to bring up along that same vein is other armor failures. Specifically, I know someone asked about. Let's say it's a one-on-one for in 5-on-5, 2 guys left. Someone throws a fighter down, stays on his feet, but a gauntlet comes off during the throw. Is that it's an armor failure, but do they get seated at that? Like, what's the consensus on that?
Here's the issue with that. I know people want to see more consistency in the refereeing, and to a large degree, that's just going to come with more experienced refs. On the flip side of that, I have to point out, it's going to come down to how the refs see it on the field. If the guy is falling down and is staggering backwards and is on his feet for another second and a half with the other fighter's gauntlet and then falls over, then I could very easily see a ref saying, well, he's still up. He's on his way down, but he's not down yet. And that guy's not able to fight. Therefore, he loses. For the most part, when I have seen a guy go down and take a piece of gear with them, the fighter that's going down is on the ground, pretty clearly, when the still standing fighter is losing his armor. So in that case, in general, I would say the fighter throwing them down and losing a piece of armor would be declared the winner. But again, it's case by case. I mean, there's only so much consistency of rules you can expect in any sport, let alone, one that's moving as fast as ours. I mean, go and watch any football game, any basketball game, and see how much the fans agree on how consistent the refereeing has been. Am I right?
I live in Philadelphia. All we do is bitch about the refs.
But in that specific case, in general, I would say that the fighter who's throwing the opponent down and loses a piece of armor in the throw would more often than not would be the winner.
Okay, so unless it's unless they're kind of stuttering, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So another question that was asked, I know it's been brought up. Some of the rail consistency there's been some talk about whether or not a fighter should be immediately sat down for grabbing the rail, either with their hand or hooking it, or whether it's a verbal warning and then eventual sit down.
Yeah.
Well,
The
because I know
way I
that's
the way
again.
I the way I'm training refs to handle that is, number one, look for the position of the hand. If the fighter's hand is above the level of the rail, they're not grabbing onto the rail, even if they're like chicken winging it with their elbow.
Mm-hmm.
That's allowed. That's fine. As soon as the hand dips down to or past the level of the rail, then the ref starts a 3 count. You can wrap them on the helmet, go let go of the rail, let go of the rail. If they get the hand back out, or if, for example, someone's staggering towards the rail and they grab onto it, bodily in order to keep themselves up, as long as they are making the effort to get back up and very clearly release that grip within 3 seconds, they're fine.
Okay.
Now, if they grab it and are scolded to let go, and they let go after 2.5 seconds and then they grab it again, then you're starting to game the rules. If we think that's deliberate, then no, you're going down. When in doubt, we try to give you the benefit of the doubt and let you keep fighting. But again, if you see somebody grabbing onto the rail, releasing after 3 seconds, then grabbing right back on, they're probably on their way down from the ref telling them to take a knee.
Okay. All right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. So another question that I heard through the grapevine. So we've seen a lot, or at least I've seen a lot of people start to use, axes. They wrap the axes around the back of the knee, try and pick the leg up to, throw them off balance. And, it's very clear, no strikes to the back of the knee.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of gets a little gray is some of the other strikes and, activity to the back of the knee.
Yeah, this has been enforced a couple of different ways over the years. The way it is written in the rules, the way it is enforced internationally, and the way I'm telling refs to call it is you are allowed to grab around the back of a knee and drag somebody up, pick them up, do whatever. There are no strikes to the back of the knee. You are allowed to grab, you are allowed to grapple, you are allowed to wrestle.
Okay. And along those same veins of strikes, what about kicking or possibly like kneeing the back of the knee?
Nope.
Not allowed.
Nice and simple. No.
All right, there you go. You heard it here first.
You also cannot stomp the top of the calf.
Right. Yeah. But like a straight up kick to the side of the knee or anything like that. That's
Nope.
What's that?
Not the back of the knee. Nope.
Sorry, the side of the knee.
Stay away from the back. The side is really close to the back.
Right. And of course, everyone
it's that old
tries
Norse
that
thing. You can't cut off my head without also taking my neck. Yeah, there you go.
And we tell fighters all the time here on the East Coast, don't leave it up to the ref to sit you down. Striking around the knee. And I don't blame them. I fully advocate on the side of caution that they start talking.
And there's 2 reasons that I teach my guys back out west the same thing, wherein just stay away from the knee, stay away from the side, stay away from the back, for 2 reasons. First, and most basic, that's how guys get injured. And for the 90+% of the year, we're fighting guys who are going to be our teammates at the World Championships. You don't want to break your teammates. And secondly, the second reason I tell people that is that the closer you get to the knee, the more you're throwing dice with what the ref sees.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And
like it happened in New World Cup where one of the guys, I can't remember which one, unfortunately, but they were fighting against the Southwest, and he landed just a brutal axe shot on Ryan Malavian, dropped him, and the referee in the middle of the field, from where he was standing, it looked like an illegal shot. It wasn't, and we were able to hash that out. But the closer you get towards those danger zones, again, the ref's primary job is to keep the fighters as safe as they can. That's their primary job. Being fair, everything else is secondary, and it's important. I don't mean to say that it isn't important, but safety is the primary thing that refs are looking for.
Right.
So stay away from the knee.
Yeah, makes total sense. So another thing that I want to bring up, and this will probably impact Miranda a lot in some of the national events, but there's a lot of talk about the time it takes for people to get on the field, time it takes like in between rounds, and what at a lot of the tournaments, it's very kind of lax. It's a general kind of, you have a minute plus maybe, a few seconds after, and it starts to bleed into it, which then could bleed into time that, we need for some of these bigger events. So is there any sort of plans to kind of tighten up the reins as far as the timing of, fights starting and
As much as we can, yes.
Okay.
As much as we can. Practically speaking, there's only so tight it's going to get. We want to always be ready 1 minute afterwards when we say, okay, close the lists, because that's the standard internationally. Now, I also have to point out that internationally, they don't live up to that standard all the times. It's just not possible. You got people coming and going, and especially when you're at a world championship tournament, and if you cut a guy off at the top levels, starting a match 5-on-4, it might as well be over.
Right.
So they tend to give you that little bit of leeway internationally, but you can't count on that little bit of leeway, because when you need it, they might not give it to you. So you have to be there. As much as we can, we want to tighten things up domestically as well at ACL events, and we're going to be working towards that. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, no, it is going to be the trains will run on time, the lists will close at this exact second. Realistically, we're not going to be able to do
I run a tight ship.
You run a tight ship. And we keep it as tight as we can. That's about the best we can do.
Okay. Miranda, can you think of any sort of rules that you kind of see kind of not being maybe interpreted right, or just some things you want some clarification on that you kind of see people getting confused about?
No, I think Lance did a really good job of covering a lot of common misconceptions and misunderstandings. I know that Ringo did specifically have a question that he wanted to ask, but due to his lack of audio, he had mentioned that there's nothing in the rules that says refs should sit.
Back.
Oh,
are you back?
He is.
I was asking your question, Ringo.
Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You're back.
A
We
little
hear you.
bit. A little bit.
Great. What was this
I
question?
heard. Am I back? I can't tell.
Miranda, what was this question?
Cool.
Okay, so I will continue with Ringo's question, and if he can chime in.
In the rules,
Go ahead.
I swear, boy.
All right.
And we lost him again. Miranda, what was this question?
Yeah.
So it says that there's nothing in the rules that says refs should sit fighters for an infractions, with one exception, and that is of holding the rail. Instead, it says fighters will receive verbal warnings, yellow cards, or red cards. So why are refs sitting fighters if that's not in the rules?
Because there's a couple ways that goes about. Number one, a violation of a rule at the ref's discretion, you can be sat down. That's just the way it works. A verbal warning is a step shy of that. A yellow card is a formal warning that gets registered with the table. You can be sat down for that as well. The reason why you are sat down, even though it only says a ref may sit them down for this one thing, the ref can sit you down for violating any rule if it is justified. If they feel it's justified, that's the way it works.
Is that something that is going to be verbally included into the next iteration of the rule set? Because I think it's causing some confusion where it says that it doesn't say that refs can sit a fighter for any infraction. It says solely for.
It is not going to be in the next iteration of the rules, because the next iteration of the rules is already written. That's going up any day. Secondly, if there's a lot of confusion about that, I might put it in. But frankly, I think following the rules or else is pretty clear. Don't break the rules. What happens if you break the rules? You get sat down. What happens if you break the rules? That's why they're rules. Now, the difference between yellow cards and red cards is a pretty fine one, and I'll go into that a little bit. In that, and that's where it gets tricky, because it comes down to intent in a lot of cases. If you are seen to be breaking a rule, like if you strike somebody in the foot because it's you threw at their lower shin and it's skidded, we might give you a yellow card if it lands on the foot, because you struck the foot. That's not allowed. We know you didn't intend, or we don't believe you intended that. but this is a warning because that was sloppy. That's the sort of thing. If you're hauling somebody from behind with a haft across their neck and they're choking, that would most likely just be you let go, take a knee, or possibly a yellow card because that is against the rules. But we don't believe you're doing it intentionally. And whenever a red card is given, it is a flagrant violation of the rules, most likely that jeopardize somebody's health explicitly, and wherein we don't believe it was accidental. That's actually one of the only ways that they will use video review internationally. Is they won't do it to review who is up, who is down. That ruling on the field stands. They will review video when a red card or a yellow card has been issued. Famously, there was an incident at the last IMCF World Championships where a fighter appeared to be striking deliberately, twice towards an exposed neck. And they sat him down. The call on the field was a red card. Then they went back and reviewed it. It's like, yeah, there's no chance that was accidental. You're gone. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, it looks like Ringo's officially calling it on that one. But
I tried, Ringo. I tried.
Yeah, we got your question now, so he's here in spirit. But so I think we both learned a lot about the rules. Kind of got a lot of clarification on it. You mentioned there is going to be a new set of rules being published. Do you have a possible release date for those new set?
That's out of my hands. It is written. It's ready to go. I can tell you right now that it will. Part of it's just bookkeeping or the order of the sections being rearranged a little bit to be a bit more natural. There's going to be a rule being inserted to govern fighter interactions with non-combatants, just to close a couple loopholes that weren't covered there. The phrasing about what kind of metal is allowable in shields is going to be just steel. If a core has to be steel of a steel shield. You can still use wood, you can still use wicker, you can still use those other materials, but if it's metal, it's got to be steel. And we're inserting bucklers, long axes, and clearing up a little bit of the language around hammerheads.
Okay. And is there any kind of major changes coming down the pipeline that might need, some fighters might have to get new equipment, or it might be somewhat
we really try to avoid that. I'm not aware of anything coming down the pipeline that's going to make any significant changes to the gear.
From the mouth of Andre, Jay, and Benoit, they are not changing regulations to Griffins.
First of all,
just letting everybody know.
All right,
stop
there you go.
calling them Griffins.
Oh, well, all right then. You heard it from the mouth of Miranda, from the mouth of to be continued.
Andre, Jay, and Benoit, and right. Head referee. No, we're not changing equipment rules.
Right, and we always advocate it, and I don't think it's explicitly in the rules, but correct me if I'm wrong, but really it should be the chapter head or the team head that talks to the ref, because I've seen a lot of fighters get
here's the deal with
refs.
That. Yeah, the team captain addresses the refs directly to contest a ruling. You can interact. You're free to interact with a ref. Like if a ref is telling you to take a knee because you don't have a weapon and you're pulling a backup, you're not going to get in trouble by saying, no, I have a weapon.
Right.
That's fine. When you are contesting their call, that's when it becomes an issue. Only the team captain on the field should be doing that. Every five-man team or 3-woman team or what have you, every team has a captain. Those are the ones who are interacting with the referees to contest a ruling or to seek clarification on something. That's the way that should go. Anyone who's had sort of team sport experience in the past, that should be really familiar to them.
And is this something that could possibly be punishable, like possibly get a yellow card from a fighter just getting too lippy with a ref, or?
It could be an unsportsmanlike conduct sort of penalty, wherein you are. Yeah, if you start going off and dropping F-bombs everywhere, yeah, you can get a yellow card for that.
Okay. All right, so something to keep in mind, new fighters, go to your chapter head, don't be a hero.
Also, I might headbutt you.
All right, and with
I want to see this happen. I want to see Lance headbutt people.
I think, Ringo is texting me now. He says, bring it on. But with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank Lance. Thank you for coming on and kind of clarifying some of the rules, because I know it's said at the end of every event, and it cannot be more true. But it's a thankless job being a ref, and it's one of the hardest jobs on the field. So, everyone support your local refs. I mean, flat out, they're awesome. But thanks again for coming on, Miranda. As always, it's lovely to have you here. And
Let's not forget to mention that Western Conference Championship is December 1st in Tulsa. And if you haven't registered, get on it. We have a lot of Tulsa locals that are reaching out and offering assistance with housing and transportation. So if you're still on the fence about making it out to Tulsa, reach out to the Tyrants. It's a great group of people with just hospitality for miles.
And as always, we're going to need more refs.
Yes.
You beat me my own segue. But as always, I'm Ben Sugarman. Lance with me today. Miranda and Evan is with us in spirit. We want to thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Till then.